What's going on, everyone? It's your man NIC from the Urban Collective alongside.
What's up, everybody? It's your First Lady, Miss Bernadine Truth. How y'all doing today?
How's everybody doing out there? What was it?
It's warm weather, so I know everyone. I said it's warm weather, so everyone's out there living their best lives. Nobody's home, and nobody thinks COVID is real.
Dude, I'm like annoyed because the whole weekend, Friday was a nice day. Saturday, 60 degrees. Sunday, 60 degrees. Monday, 60 degrees. I'm like, oh, first day that you go back to work, 85. I'm like, are you kidding me? Why couldn't we have this on Saturday, Sunday, even yesterday? At least give us like one day of nice weather. Friday was the only day. Literally any day, work days, and now it's just like bad. I don't know what's going on. This weather is not trying to let us live our best lives, but whatever.
It's different. But I will say I appreciated having the warm weather, but when it's like not too hot, because it allows me to be productive but still enjoy nice weather. You know what I mean? I feel like when it's too nice too quick, my mind, I'm just kind of like, oh, like, do we really have to work today? Not necessary.
I know, especially for the holiday weekend too.
Right. So I'm like, at least it was holiday weekend, but at least it was like kind of cool. So you were still productive but could relax and things like that. But if the holiday weekend was just like today, nobody would have been home. People already weren't home. But like nobody would have been home.
You saw the videos and the pictures online.
Yeah. So I mean
everywhere.
Right. I mean, it's a vacation for everybody right now. You know what I mean? So it's different. It's different. But I don't know. Like, again, I'm happy it's like nice weather. I think it's a little sad though, just thinking about the ways of the world. So like, even though it's like really nice out, I've said it before that I'm nervous for violence rates. Like people are like bored, people are going to be out and about. Like, I just hope that doesn't lead to more killings and attacks. Like in Jamaica Plain, we had some assaults that took place over the weekend, and a couple of days ago took the lives of some individuals. In Hyde Park, it was the same thing. And so I'm sitting here like really nervous on a local level about what's going on with violence. And then it broke my heart to hear today, right, that another Black man's life was taken away at the hands of police in Minneapolis. George Floyd, was talking about he can't breathe. And there's video footage of a police officer with his knee around this man's neck who was already in handcuffs and arrested. Again, constantly saying, I can't breathe. And then was killed the minute he was incarcerated. And so I mean, the 4 police officers were involved in that incident. All 4 of them were since fired, but we're also looking at this situation like, don't just fire these individuals, but they took a life, right? And so that's what we need to hold people accountable for. So I guess on the one hand, these are police officers where right away, the head was just like, absolutely not. You're not going to be on my staff anymore. But again, they killed a man. Right. An unarmed man, a person who was already, again, in their custody. And so I think about violence. I think about how people are going to respond to warm weather. I think about places like Minneapolis. I think about Ahmaud. Like, I just think there's just so many cases that are taking place right now that are coming to the forefront that makes me really nervous about being Black in America and being Black in America in the summertime.
Yeah, I finally watched it. Normally, I hate watching those videos because it's like it gets underneath my skin. But today I was like, you know what? I saw it so much being posted. I was like, all right, let me see how bad this is.
That is.
And it's like 7 minutes plus on this video. And I heard there's different perspectives too. You have different angles of it being shot. There's one from a firefighter side, but the one that I saw was from a young Black gentleman. You can clearly hear him saying, oh, get off his neck, bro, over and over and over. And the part where you see the man laying lifeless on the ground and they see him lifeless, somebody comes, touches him. The paramedics come, touch him, feel for a pulse, clearly doesn't find a pulse or a strong pulse at that time. And he's still on his neck. That's the part that I was just like, There's no words.
No, it was intentional. That was, and to me, I'm like, that's murder. Like, I don't understand how else you're going to classify that. You know, they're going to say like, oh, you know, our lives were in danger, our lives were at threat, but it's clear that their lives were not at threat in this particular, at that moment. And so I think that's what the head police officer was saying, the lead. He was just like, listen, there's a lot of situations that we have to encounter in this world, but most of them don't require that level of force, right?
Exactly.
And so this man is already down, right? Already down,
like,
outnumbered.
If you require that level of force, once the man is subdued, then you can say, okay, let me relax.
Then it's done.
He's not going anywhere. He's handcuffed. The man, you can hear him saying, I can't breathe, but yet you're still applying the same level of force that you were applying beforehand. This is where I think
until his life is
a lot of the time they're saying training, people need to get trained. The police officers need to be trained better on the way to de-escalate certain things. This is what needs to happen, because otherwise it's like they're trained that way. It's like you have to apply the force until, and it's getting ridiculous.
Yeah, but ridiculous. I think that's intentional attacks, right? Because it's just like, yes, you're gonna apply the pressure, you're gonna apply the force, you're gonna try to detain, but at the same time, again, like there's limits to this, there's boundaries, right? And so there's like no boundaries were adhered to. I mean, just like Eric Gardner, like he was in 2014, he was like, I can't breathe. Like letting people know, they're not saying I can't breathe because they want you to release them and then run away.
Exactly.
It's I can't breathe because you are taking my life. Like you're really literally taking my life, and we need to do better as a people. And so again, here we are in a situation where these cops were let go, but that's still not justice to me, right? Because again, you just that it's not even manslaughter, second degree, it's none of that. That was like straight up murder, and we need to acknowledge it for what it is. We need to hold people accountable. Like, and then I was just looking at a number of news stories too, like a number of people were just out here falsely labeling Black folk as those who were taking their kids' lives. Like a woman was caught on video talking about calling the cops on a Black man in Central Park. You know what I mean? Just because.
Karen.
I'm like, what is going on? Like, this is not funny to me, right? Like, you can't just call Black
fired.
just
fired.
Just for the yeah, it's fine. But still, I'm just like,
no, I'm just like that. I think not only did she get fired, but also they came and took her dog away from her. Also additionally, so she had to give the dog back.
Right. You know, people and their dogs.
These things need to happen, and I think like these consequences need to happen, because if there's no consequences, like they say, if we didn't have cameras, we didn't have video. Black people have been saying this for years. Like, I did not do this.
Right.
Or, this is not what happened. The person is lying. Now you're getting to see this, and I think this is what white America is seeing. And even though they see it, I think a lot of people are not believing it. It's kind of like, well, it's that 1 in a million. Like, no.
Yeah, it was like, how many cases? But it's also tough because it's like in a week, right? So you have the Florida mother who said like 2 Black men abducted her autistic son, only to find out that she allegedly drowned this child. I'm like, so stop calling Black just like this, because again, some people might just hear that situation and believe that, even though they're saying like, oh no, she actually really drowned this person. The rest of the story, or the truth of the story, could easily be dismissed, right? Exactly. And so now you're going to target Black people. So it's just like, again, I just feel like we're just living in a time where being Black, not living in a time now as though it's new, right? But we're constantly living in a time where being Black is a danger, just because. And for people to be able to just call out Black on purpose, I feel like people clearly understand too what the ramifications are. Like, they're like, oh, well, if I call a Black person, or if I believe it on a Black person, then I'm good and I'm innocent, right? Like the pastor claims that he was kidnapped by Black men to avoid admitting that he was in a hotel room. Did you hear that story?
No, I didn't hear that.
Recently too. Yes, a pastor. So he claimed that he was kidnapped by Black men to avoid admitting that he was in a hotel room doing some things he shouldn't have been doing in the hotel.
Oh.
What are we doing?
My man got his freak on and blinking.
This is funny. This is terrible.
Like,
I'm like, okay,
like, there's certain things like you just got like I can't, because if I don't laugh at it, I'm gonna get so frustrated and the anger is gonna build up inside of me. It's kind of one of those like, I have to laugh to keep. You guys say you have to laugh to keep from crying. This is me laughing to keep from being angry. Like, how you gonna?
No, I'm angry. I'm angry. So I'm like, you got mothers talking about their kids falsely being killed by people. You got a pastor, the one who serves the Lord, the Almighty, lying on Black guys.
Yeah.
A woman at a park A man who's killed at the hands of police. I mean, can we? This is in a week's time.
This is a weekend. Hey, like I wanted to ask you, do you feel as if I feel like with this whole Trump being in power, and I feel like I don't know. I've seen a rise in this type of racism and this type of behavior.
Yeah.
Like I felt like, I mean, it's existed. We all know it's existed, but lately, I don't know. I feel like it's becoming at the forefront.
But we've said this though. So like the day Trump was elected, the day after he was elected, people posted swastikas up on people's restaurants, storefronts were broken into, windows were broken, etc. Right. And so now we're getting to a point where we're gonna be in re-election. And so I feel like a lot of this behavior is just resurfacing in exacerbated ways because we have the ability to do that. Like election is coming, their number one supporter is about to be up. People are frustrated. People are bored. People are carrying out fantasies, challenges, dangers, whatever the case may be. And I'm like, if you think this is comedy and you think like to me, I'm like, we need to unpack this on several levels, right? For you to be in your own home, for you to take the life of your own child, for you to want to engage in promiscuous behavior at a hotel room, whatever, right? So like you're making intentional choices on how you want to lead your life. And then to protect yourself, you then blame Black people for doing something they had nothing to do with. The thought that you could even, the reality or the thought that you could even think to do that, right? And know that or believe that that will protect you is a representation of the world that we live in on a massive level. Because I would never be in a position where my life is compromised or I'm doing something that I shouldn't be doing. And I'm going to say, oh, let me just say like, I got beat up by some white people to just make sure that everyone just, forgives Bernadine for her actions. No, like I wouldn't think to do those things. No. And Justice Smollett needs to go have several seats. But no, but all jokes aside, like
I would
never do something like that. I would never do something like that.
I'm going mad, like because it's like
for me, I can't because I need that rage to be here because I feel like if I disregard the rage, then it's almost like it just didn't happen and it's not here, right? But I'm like, no, this is disgusting.
At the same time,
this is disturbing.
That rage makes you so angry and so. It's like untrusting of other people, especially like I've seen people that now they look at white people like they're the opposite, like they're I don't know. It's very.
I mean, but white people look at us like we're the opposites for no reason. Clearly, these are several situations that just blatantly had people there. Whether or not Black people were even in close proximity to them is irrelevant, right? Like that's what they did. And now I'm not gonna sit here and say like, oh, I think all white people are terrible and I don't trust any white people. I can't say that. And I've always said that since I was younger because I had a lot of allies and supporters who were white. Yeah. And so I have that perspective. Now, with that being said, though, I will clearly call out a white person and say, get your peers, get your people. They are our people as humanity for sure. But until white people can recognize Black people as being equals too and as being people too, then I'm going to tell a white person to get your people because you're looking at me like my people versus your people. And I'm not saying that needs to be a war on humanity, but this is a war on humanity when you are literally outlining a particular racial demographic of people to call out to protect yourself because of your terrible actions and your unjust and inhumane ways. Like I can't deal with it. I can't do it in a week. Like,
no, not even a week.
A weekend. Whatever.
Like,
I'm like, this is like called Black Weekend.
Friday to Monday, Friday to yesterday.
I can't. Like I actually can't wrap my mind around this. And it's not even like it's in one particular part of the world. I mean, one could be like, oh, Midwest, South, whatever. I don't really care wherever it is. It's happening. It's happening.
Especially this whole thing. Minneapolis is a big city. It's not like a small city. It's one of the bigger cities out in the Midwest. So come on now. I don't want to hear that. The Midwest.
It's making me hot. And then you're going to have local issues come up, right? And people are going to be like, oh, but look, they're killing each other. And I'm like, listen, let us not derail from the realities because the truth is Black people are killing Black people because it's still about equity. It's still about access and it's still about poverty. So until we live in a more equitable and more sustainable society, I don't need people talking about what Black people are doing on with this Black on Black crime. We need to talk about why white people can be. Exactly. It's like, no, let's talk about how you are in the comforts of your own home and you are taking the lives of the people just because you're not held accountable. You're not serving jail time. You're not truly really losing your job. You're still protected, or it's months, right? So Ahmaud died in February. I'm like, it's May and we were talking about it. I'm just like, no. These are not things that can continue to happen. And this happens. And I don't care who's in the White House. I don't care who's in office, right? Justice needs to be served for the sake of justice being served and in a true humane way. Stefan, I'm over it. When I tell you, I said in a weekend, I'm just like, here I am about black magic. And I'm like, damn. It's hard. It's hard. Yeah. It's hard. No, innocent people. Definitely innocent people. I'm just like, damn. It's terrible to me.
I know we can stay on this all night and we can spend hours talking about this. But let's move on to a good story that happened over the weekend. And the story that I'm talking about, or an event that happened over the weekend, I do not know if you watch. Well, Bernie, I would hope you would watch the Verzuz.
I heard.
Man. What? You didn't watch it? You didn't watch it?
I heard it was great, though. I heard it was amazing.
Right there? I'm muting you.
I promise you. I promise you. Not on purpose. Sorry.
You're being muted. You are being muted right now. No. Like, are you serious? You did not watch that?
I heard it was great. I heard it was. I really didn't.
Well, watch the highlight. I need you to watch it. Like, I'm being serious.
I want to watch the whole thing.
You can watch it. Look up on YouTube. They have the whole event. It's recorded. You can find it on YouTube. It's about an hour and 15 minutes long. It'll be the best hour and 15 minutes that you had during the quarantine. So for myself and for the collective, other people that watch the Beenie versus Bounty Killer Verzuz event. If you don't know what a Verzuz is something that Timbaland and Swizz Beatz, which are two producers in the hip hop game and music industry, that created an event where two artists can go against each other. It's not like a battle, but think of it as you're going hits for hits. You're playing records. But they had this weekend on Saturday night, they had Bounty Killer versus Beenie Man, which is two reggae artists, two dancehall artists from Jamaica. What people don't know, if you've never listened to reggae music, dancehall music, is they have what they call clashes. Clashes are basically exactly what they did, but they're doing that live on concerts, on stages. They do these events annually. Different artists go versus each other. It's kind of like a battle royale, like Royal Rumble type of thing. Who's the best? Who's standing out? Who has the best hits? Who can move the crowd the best? And they did this in the same room. So they both were in the same room. They had their own DJs there. There was a little bit of audience on the side and everything like that, but they kept it small and they broadcast this event. And the thing about this event, I grew up with dancehall. My college years I spent with dancehall from the early 2000s all the way to the mid 2000s. Dancehall was king in the clubs. If you went to the club, you was pasaing, dancing, doing all types of stuff, moves, everything. So that brought me back. I love that. And the way that they worked and the way they performed off each other. You have Beenie Man performing. Beenie Man is a great artist. He has hits for days. Hits with rappers, hits with R&B from Maya, so many different people. Bounty has a voice like, I can't even, if I could get his voice, I would do what they call those like voiceovers. He has a beautiful voice, like a deep, raspy voice, but it's very clear. And you see him, his voice does not fit his frame. You would think it's like some big, muscular guy. The guy's very skinny, very small, so his voice does not fit his frame at all, which is very interesting. So for the event, they're going back and forth, hits for hits. And there was a part where,
but they were together, right? I heard that they were like physically in the same.
In the same room. They were together in the same rooms. They're vibing, going off each other. The energy is crazy. One point, cops tried to shut it down. Cops came in the room he's like, bro, really? Are you really trying to shut this down? There's 500,000 people watching this. You're trying to shut us down right now. And he's like, do you want to be that guy? So that was the line over the weekend. You kept hearing it from everybody. That turned into a whole meme about, do you want to be that guy? Huh? You want to be that guy? Like, you want to shut this down for no reason. We're licensed. They're doing it. You can tell they're clearly doing it on a sound stage. So it's not like it's a private house or anything like that. And then you had Bounty that reached out to Rihanna, tried to holler at Rihanna during the event. Rihanna was on there watching. 500,000 people came together and watched it, the energy. And then at the end, they did a battle, a battle which they splashed, where we had one rhythm, and they played that one rhythm. And literally, because they had so many hits, they couldn't keep going. and playing hits for hits, they went in freestyle. So they did their hits in freestyle, song for song on the same.
That's so cool.
You have to.
I heard it was amazing.
If you come here next week,
no, I definitely
watch this. We're gonna have some problems. I'm letting you know.
Okay. I heard it was great. I really did. I heard it was fantastic. Yeah. I'm looking forward to it.
It probably back. I was recording. I was jumping around my house. My wife was looking at me like I was crazy. I did not care. I loved it. It was like one of those moments during quarantine. Like I left it and I'm like, yo, I would love to go to like a bashment party, to a basement party, to a party like on Washington Street in the hall somewhere. Off Washington Street and everything like that.
We can do it for July 4th weekend. I may or may not be throwing a get together.
Corona.
Remember my last one?
Yeah, I remember your last one. I left early. I was an old man.
That's it. We'll leave it there. No.
I still have that video of you. I don't know what you was doing.
No. I don't know what you're talking about. So it's fine. Moving on.
But no, it was amazing.
Moving on.
I loved it. Make sure you watch it. And then one last thing, very brief, I want to just touch on it, which is I think is something very amazing that's happening tomorrow. So Wednesday, May 27th. If people don't know, so for astronauts and people going to space, America has not gone into space as a country for at least 9+ years. Since 2011 was the last time the space shuttle went into space. NASA shut down program down, and they haven't had anybody go into space. Tomorrow, if you do not know, the owner of Tesla, Elon Musk, that started this company called SpaceX, they privatized going to space. In under 10 years, he's able to build rockets, but not just build rockets, but a spaceship that can be reused and go to space multiple times. So imagine like we had airplanes and use the airplane once, you fly it, and you have to retire it. That's how the space program was, which made no sense. So now they're able to reuse that. Tomorrow they are going to be launching 2 astronauts into space to go to the International Space Station, which is amazing for somebody like me who's very into tech news. It may not seem like it's a big deal, but it is a very big deal because now you have an industry being privatized. So now it's not being held by these government bureaucracies. Even the 2 astronauts, they was like, in the past, we wouldn't want a change to happen. It would take 6 months. A change now happens in 2 days because we say, hey, we don't like this control. Can you change it this way? Oh, okay, fine. We can change it because you're telling us what to do. In the past, that didn't happen. So I love that. If you can watch it, it's going to be broadcast tomorrow. Since because of the whole corona, then advise the people to not go over down in Florida to go watch it. So you can watch it. You can look it up on YouTube, NASA's channel. SpaceX will be broadcasting it, but it is happening tomorrow. If you watch this or if you heard it, look it up on YouTube. Something's pretty amazing. So that's all I wanted to cover real quick. And as always, you know, we have a guest for everyone. We will be bringing in the
Pilar.
This evening. Give me 1 second. Let me add her to the stream. Hello.
Hello. So excited to have our celebrity guest of the week with us. Yes, everybody who's on our show for this segment is highlighted as a celebrity. As a podcast, we love to highlight folks who are doing phenomenal work in the greater Boston community. You are our local celebrities, and so we love to highlight everyone who's doing, again, this great work and really showcasing not just your end result, but really talk about your journey in the process and how you came to be and like really unpacking your story. So thank you so much for being here. Before we jump into conversations, I do want to read your brief bio to our listeners and our guests so they know a little bit more about you. So, ladies and gentlemen of the Urban Collective, I'm so excited to introduce you all to Pilar Tucker. Pilar is a mental health therapist, clinical psychology doctoral candidate, and the founder and CEO of Empower Our Crown. For the past decade, Pilar has been a strong proponent of mental health and wellness and leadership. Her life mission is to empower communities across the globe to become mentally and emotionally competent world changers by bridging the gap between mental health and wellness and leadership development. While in her doctoral program, Pilar is advancing her clinical expertise by focusing on global mental health through research, advocacy, policy, and application. She is dedicated to enhancing the mental wellness and leadership in vulnerable populations, such as women and girls and communities of color, once again, across the globe. So without further ado, folks, I'd love to introduce you all to Pilar.
Welcome.
Pilar, say hello to the people.
Hello, people. Thank you for such a warm welcome. I love that. I feel like a celebrity now.
You are a celebrity. Everyone on the show is a celebrity.
Yes,
We're super
every
excited
single
to have you. And I see, take it away.
Yes. So Pilar, I know we heard your bio, but I wanted to to know a little bit more about you. Why did you choose mental health? I know that's a big focus for you.
Mhm. Yeah, so mental health really in high school is when I got introduced to psychology. I ended up taking up some psychology courses and I really loved them.
Mhm.
And I just continued with that in college and, majored in psychology with a concentration in mental health counseling. And it wasn't really until I think grad school that I understood, why I was
Mhm.
doing this because
Mhm.
in our communities, mental health isn't really spoken about. So I think I was getting the textbook description of what mental health was. And then in grad school, I started like really seeing how my mental health was deteriorating. So I
Mhm.
had to understand it on a different level that a textbook couldn't really tell me.
Oh
Wow.
wow.
Thank you so much for sharing that. So you're talking about like so interested in high school, but then you're realizing that you have this aha moment where you're like the way that this is being illustrated or depicted for me is not what I'm able to see in my own community. Right. From my understanding.
Yeah.
So as you're talking about that and you having like your aha moment, how has mental health shown up or manifested in your life to have you focused and committed to acknowledging that kind of level of work today?
Yeah, definitely. So when I noticed that my mental health was deteriorating, I really had to focus on why, and I didn't really have at the time any access to, therapists. That was kind of still in our communities, not something that was welcomed. And although I knew about them, it wasn't easily accessible for me. And my family wasn't really talking about, oh, go get a therapist or anything. It's kind of just like you keep going to school, get your education, get a good job. And through that process, I did those things because I thought that's what I was supposed to do. But in the process, it was really damaging for me psychologically. And at the time I was treating other, in my grad school, we were interning and stuff like that. So I was treating patients at the time. And then upon a graduation, same thing. But I just felt like there was a disconnect. I'm treating these patients to be mentally well and giving them interventions. And inside, I'm
Yeah.
suffering.
Yeah.
I was suffering in silence. And for like I needed to not suffer anymore. So that was really identifying what I needed to improve my mental health and then be able to like create a platform of wellness.
It's amazing.
Pilar, real quick, why do you think
Mhm.
that in the Black community we do not really pay attention to mental health? Do you think it's something that's happened because of slavery, or it's
Mhm.
just something that, like you said, we don't have access to it, and that's why
Yeah.
we're like, oh, since we don't have access to this, we don't really
Mhm.
care too much about it?
I think all of the above.
Okay.
There's so many different reasons why communities of color, Black communities of color especially, stray away from mental health. For one, there's a major stigma of
Mhm.
the illness. A lot of times Black families think that, oh, you're just acting crazy, or you
Mhm.
need to just go pray about it. In all reality,
Yeah.
because we don't have that language, that clinical language, we can't really decipher, is this me going crazy and I need to pray to God, or is this something that I need from my therapist?
Mhm.
And so we struggle collectively, truthfully, just trying to comprehend what mental health even is,
Mhm.
and what that means and what it looks like, because it looks so differently across families, even within our Black race.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think part of it too, right? Like I think sometimes people just don't even know how to define mental health. I think when people
Yeah.
think of mental health, they automatically think, like the people
Mhm.
who are dealing with like schizophrenia, or people who aren't able to communicate and aren't able to live healthy lives. But mental health is something that impacts us on a regular basis. So it can be,
Right.
depression, whether that's mild or chronic depression, truly ranges, but that's
Right.
real. When you talk
Yeah.
about PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder,
That's
PTSD,
real.
again, a blanket term that talks about like your response to trauma on a later
Trauma.
level, right? Is not just focusing on trauma based on you know, again, like based on war, right? Like it can be based on relationships and domestic violence in your home. It can be based on racism and constantly being oppressed and constantly being targeted. It can be based on your environment. Like if you grew up in neighborhoods that have a lot of violence around you, right? And so like gunshots, you know, you can be triggered, you can be really tense, you'll be nervous to sleep, right? We know that not sleeping also impacts your well-being and your ability to function in humanity, right? And so I think it's helping people to almost identify just how normal these occurrences can be, right? People say everybody's a little bit crazy, right? And depending on who you are, you're like, oh, I could laugh it off. But I think no, seriously, like everybody has that moment. Mess with somebody the right way. Somebody's gonna see cold red, right?
Absolutely.
Right. And, we have to have those conversations. It's all around us.
So talking about that, I know in the US, you know, looking at it on a global scale, you study it on a global scale. How do you see different countries? How do they approach mental health versus the United States?
Yes, that's a great question. So this is something that I've actually just started to really delve in about in my, you know, doctoral program. I'm concentrating in global mental health. And I just see how, you know, the Westernized standard of mental health is very different from what, you know, places abroad. For instance, Africa. Africans have a very different approach to mental health, and it's not as holistic as, you know, the Westernized culture is really adapting this holistic lifestyle, but more so political, so social, political. What's going on in our politics? Who is able to prescribe, you know, and who is not? Sometimes in other countries, they're seeing mental health, they don't have the same diagnoses as we have in the DSM, you know? So their schizophrenia is really hearing voices because of voodoo, you know? So it's very different across the globe because, again, the language, you know, and then what's susceptible and not susceptible in the Western culture and non-Western cultures.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for providing us with that level of perspective too on a global level. You mentioned a little bit a little earlier, like the importance of like representation, right? And like being a person of color, because again, this experience, you delving deeper into it, you recognize that what you're learning in your textbook doesn't necessarily always apply to your community. So understand that representation is very important to who we are. And we also know that there aren't a lot of clinicians of color in this level of work, right? And professionals of color are very few and far in between. Talk to us about your experience and what your experience has been like as a doctoral student of color, you know, and the need you have to have more representation of people like you in the field.
Yes, well, it's very lonely. I'll tell you that. Only about 2% of psychologists around the world are Black. And in my doctoral program, I'm often the only Black student in my class. So to say it's lonely is an understatement. It's very isolating in ways because, you know, when we are talking about multiculturalism and, you know, trying to create spaces for all individuals, typically that all is very white. So trying to learn and get the education in terms of what I need for a psychologist, while also trying to advocate for people who look like me. And I feel myself advocating almost every class because the tools don't apply to us, you know, the even the coping skills. Oh, go take a walk in nature for 5 minutes after
like
school.
Where?
And most
it's like like I'm in this clinical chair because my neighborhood doesn't allow me to go for walks.
Right. Yeah. So I experienced that a lot. So it is very difficult, but it's also empowering because I think the more I am able to, you know, show up in those classes and have a voice and then go bring that to my community, then the more like younger people who look up to me can see me in them, you know, and vice versa. And hopefully, you know, if they like psychology and love mental health, I'm serving as a hope for them.
That's amazing.
So one thing I wanted to go on with that is, okay, so being in the class, being that only Black, you ever feel like, okay, I just want to be student, another person studying. I don't want to be that token Black person where every time something's asked, everybody's looking at you like, hey, what do you think? It's like you're speaking for the entirety of
Black
Black
community.
people. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh yeah, definitely. There was one class actually last semester that I had to say, it was like a sociology course. So we were talking a lot about race and gender and all the isms. And one of the topics we were talking about was race. And a lot of the conversation was really trying to marginalize all Black people in one specific box. And I was at first I was angry, and then I was like, you know what, I need to say something. I said, you know, this isn't my experience that you're talking about, and I'm a Black person, you know, and it's not fair for you to conceptualize the Black race as one, because there's so many different parts of us, you know, and different things that we go through individually and collectively. So that was a very interesting moment, because my professor in that moment couldn't even really respond to me. I think that it was such an uncomfortable thing for me to profess out loud that they weren't used to, that nobody was there. And I remember talking to one of my Black mentors about it, that I was feeling like I was literally in like an ocean without a life vest, and everybody around me had a life vest, and I'm stretching for them to like help me out. And they're just looking at me like, figure it out, sis. You know, so it's tough, you know.
I bet. You know, it's interesting too, because as you say that, you know, I hear the two sides of that coin, right? Solely for like people of color and historically marginalized populations. Because on the one hand, right, you can't have everyone classify us as though like we're just one collective of experience, right? Because being Black looks different for various Black folk. But then on the other side too, right? So then on the other side is like some portions of our textbooks could actually apply to the lived experiences of Black people too, because it's like not every Black person is in fact in a dangerous neighborhood, right? Or is nervous. Like even as I said, think about the comment I made earlier, jokingly but seriously, right? Like sometimes clients are in the chair because they can't walk around their neighborhoods, and that indeed is triggering. But there are also Black people who never have to fear where they're walking down the street, right? Like and never have to fear certain elements of life. And so again, this trauma and mental health, again, I think it's important for people to understand, like, looks different for different people, right? Absolutely. And so I would say on that note, right, as we're thinking about our communities and our people, like, what do survivors, in your words, like, what do you think survivors and allies of mental health like need to understand about mental health in order to really unpack a lot of the stigmas that I think comes with it? Like, what are some of these elements that we just don't address? But if we did address them, we'd be able to understand, like, oh, like this in fact is not something I need to be afraid of. Rather, it's something I need to further understand, unpack, and acknowledge as like part of my being.
Yeah, I think, well, all mental health therapists, psychologists, social workers across the board, they have a responsibility for social change and using their practices ethically and competently. So if you're going to do all three, then you really have to understand that meeting the client where they're at is integral. And sometimes meeting the client where they're at is, you know, understanding. You have to be culturally humble. I think a lot of people try to go into situations thinking they know it all, and that ruins the therapeutic relationship before it can even develop. So really being mindful and intentional of who you're serving, you know, and ask. Don't just assume. You got to ask. I know I always ask my clients, so who are you? Just because you come into my space and you have you're dressed well and you speak well, that means very little, you know. So who are you at your core? And I think when people understand who an individual is for them, outside of their family, outside of their culture, outside of their community, then the other things are easier to be digested and understood.
Yeah,
I love that. Thank you so
going
much.
on with that, with how you're treating people, why do you think modern medicine, why do you think when you go to a hospital, somebody goes there, the last thing that they look at and they want to help you with is mental health? Versus, you know, oh, let's prescribe you pills, let's prescribe you medicines, or do everything else besides asking the person. Now you get the questions here and there, oh, how are you mentally? But I feel like it's not like that at the forefront. Why is that?
Yeah, well, I think there's a lot of reasons, because one, money. People know that if you ask mental health questions, then you're going to have to not only get diagnosed to someone else, another physician, but then you lose out on money. Everything, and I'm not going to say everything, but many things are a bill. So if you're coming into the doctor's office with specific symptoms, they're treating the symptoms, not necessarily you. So they want to treat the symptoms so they can write it off and you go ahead.
Yeah.
Mental health, you do treat the symptoms, but you also have to take the time to know the individual. You know, you can't just say, hey, you have schizophrenia and bipolar. There's a level of assessment that you need that can't necessarily, it should take place in the doctor's office. I think you should work alongside a doctor, mental health therapist, and a doctor, but it doesn't always because of, you know, finances, maybe the economy, you know, just the stigma. Again, even doctors have stigma against mental health therapists. I've seen that. I've worked with them, and and I see it. So many reasons, but those are, I would say, the top two.
No, I thank you for sharing that too, right? And I do agree that I think that doctors and mental health clinicians should truly work more in cohesiveness, more so than in division, because, you know, like whoever your primary care physician is, one should probably recommend you to some therapists, right? And just identify like based on your visits, if they happen often enough, and vice versa. You know, like a clinician can also say, hey, you haven't been feeling well for a while. Like maybe it's like, have you thought about going to the doctors and possibly getting that checked out a little bit, right? And I think that, you know, the point that you made, Pilar, is real, where I think in the historically marginalized community too, we just don't trust medicine, right? I think medicine, like medical care and government are the two where we're like, no. And to no surprise, right, the historically marginalized population loses the most when it comes to our well-being and health. And survival in the world, right? Because again, these are the two spaces where we lack trust the absolute most. And it's disheartening. You know, so when dealing with mental health, like what should people avoid, I would say, in professional and personal spaces? So I think sometimes we talk about, you know, what we should acknowledge in self-care, but in that journey, is there anything that you feel like somebody should avoid? Like an example I could think of is sometimes people are like, don't talk about your trauma at work, right? Is that something you truly believe? Or is that like, you know, there's a time and a place, like, you know, again, like what are your insights on, again, like what should people avoid in professional and personal spaces?
So I would say avoid anything that doesn't resonate well with you. And I know that's pretty broad, but a lot of times we try to go into spaces that don't make us feel good and they're not supportive of us. And we begin to disclose things that people don't really care about. So we want to be mindful of where and why we're disclosing, you know, and who we're disclosing to, because you want to always find a trusted individual. And maybe that isn't a therapist right away or a doctor right away, but you want to make sure that you are telling the person who you trust what's going on, you know? So I would say avoid going into spaces that don't support what you have going on. Sometimes we want to run from home and go to a new home to tell our business where that home doesn't even care, you know? So really being intentional, we have to be intentional of identifying those safe spaces, because you have your safe zone and you have your danger zone. If it's not sitting well with you, you know, if you don't have people who are supporting you, whatever they look like, then you should really avoid those spaces, because that will trigger, you know, more mental illness. And it will trigger negative thoughts, and it will trigger a space that is hard to come out of if you don't have the proper supports in place.
Okay.
Thank you for that. Safe zones and danger zones.
I know, that's very interesting. So going to see a therapist, you have a lot of people, okay, they finally get to that stage, they're able to go see a therapist, and they've been seeing the therapist, let's say, a couple of months now, and nothing is changing. They're not feeling better, they're not getting better. They're still in that funk and things are still bad for them. What is your advice, or what should that person do? Should they still continue and push through it, or should they seek another therapist, or just leave it all together?
So that's a great question. First, you should talk to your therapist about what's going on. You know, if there's a sudden shift in the therapeutic relationship and you're not feeling fulfilled, you're not reaching your treatment goals, address the therapist. You know, it's our job to serve you. You know, so if we aren't serving you for whatever reason, it's really your obligation to say, hey, this isn't working out. And as a therapist, someone who will hopefully be competent and ethical will say, well, what went wrong? And then how can I help support this getting back together? And if at that point, that's still not enough, then it would be the best thing to say, hey, can you help me find a new therapist? And that therapist will help facilitate that process.
Absolutely. And that therapist should help to do that. I think that sometimes therapists don't. They're like, no, I want to hold on to you. You're my favorite client. And I'm like, no, if the client is saying goodbye, then it's goodbye, right? But I'll be honest too, I'm very open. Like, I used to go to therapy as well. I'm still debating whether or not I want to go back. I want to make sure it fits within my schedule, because I think it's really important to invest in myself. I'd encourage people to also recognize that going to therapy takes time to even figure out what your relationship is like with your therapist too, right? So I think some people might have an idea that they're going to go in there and first session they're ready to go. Right. It's like some people go in there like that, right? And then some people go in there like, I'm not opening up my mouth for 6 months. So it really depends. But I tell people, like, give it at least that 3 to 4 session type of thing, right? Because the initial session will always be an intake. It's just about getting to know you, getting some facts, some data points about who you are. And then second, third, and fourth, it's really like, your opportunity to get a feel of who the therapist is. The therapist will get a feel of who you are. And then I also encourage people, like, when you feel like that therapy session is like, it's getting so deep and you start avoiding it and you're like, I don't want to go because they're going to make me talk about X, Y, and Z. That's in fact when you need to go. Because I think that people, when they hit that point where exactly where you want, it's fight or flight, right? And you're like, listen, I gotta go oftentimes because this is like, it's getting too deep, it's getting too heavy. Recognize that as those are your triggering points, right? Those are those points in your life where you're like, this is too personal, this is too deep, or I'm not ready. But I agree with you too, Pilar, that it's important for clients to recognize that they own that space too, and can say, hey, I'm not ready to talk about this. Like, this is making me really anxious right now, or I'm really uncomfortable. I don't know where this is coming from. And being able to have those open dialogues, because your clinician gets to know who you are a little bit. And learns more about like your triggering points too, so that you can develop that level of trust. And therapists also do not answer questions for you. Fun fact, folks. It is your job to come to your own conclusions. They guide you, but they do not tell you what you need to do with your life. The whole point. No. So don't be like, should I do this or that? They'll be like, well, what do you think? And people be like, oh, they just don't ever give me answers. That's not the point. The point is helping you to get there, so that you can really unpack your unconscious mind and like really explore where you want to go with it. So
and to add, Bernadine, a competent therapist will also, check in on you, and see how the therapy is going, especially after that intake, like you mentioned. It's our job to assess, is this working for you? And not to say they're going to do that every 30 minutes of the session, but at least every session, your therapist should be asking, so how, are we achieving our goals? If they're not going back to the treatment plan that you both, developed together, then that's a warning sign, because your therapist is invested in you and therefore needs to understand that it's, like you said, it's guiding. The therapist will guide, they won't answer the questions, but a part of the guidance is to assess how effective the therapy process is going.
Absolutely. You talk about what is it? Safety planning? Treatment planning. Treatment planning. Thank you so much. Can you talk to us about what a treatment plan is?
Yeah.
Sure. So, and I know that for all the agencies I've worked for and the companies that I've gone for, we've done treatment plans. So that's really after the intake. After that 2 hours, it could be 90-minute intake that you get all the demographic information, past history, family history, substance abuse history, and all that. Then you are, and your client wants to stay with you, then it's your job as a therapist to create a treatment plan. So this is kind of, what is your diagnosis? What are your goals? How will we get there? So for me, I know I do a lot of CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy. So a lot of my clients know that I'm doing some action-based, interventions. So they'll have some homework. Yes, we'll do talk therapy and really understand, the essence of why you're here. But in the therapy session, we're going to implement some, concrete goals and action steps for you to achieve and make progress. So that treatment plan is really the trajectory outline of how your patient will, heal in simplified words.
So talking about that treatment plan real quick, how often are you changing that with a patient that you're seeing throughout the therapy sessions?
Great question. So say on your treatment plan, you have 5 goals. Patient A has now achieved 2. So we assess at that point, okay, you've achieved 2 out of your 5 goals. Would you like to add some, or would you like you just achieve all 5 before we go to the next thing? It depends on the patient. Again, that's going to be imperative to meet the client where they are, because sometimes those 2 goals can take months. Whereas maybe for another patient, 5 goals can take 5 weeks. So it really depends, on who the patient is you're serving, and then what their level of comfort is with, 1, going to a next goal, and 2, being challenged, because some therapists will challenge you. We've been meeting for some time now. Let's see how you will do with now implementing goal 3.
Gotcha.
Sounds like some long processes for folks, right? So it's not like you're going into the session today and you're like, woof, that was a good 2 months, thanks, let's keep it going. It takes a while. I mean, there are people who have been in therapy since they were children, and there are people who are in therapy for years. There are people who are also in therapy for a few months. I think, again, to your point with treatment plans, I think it all depends on the goals you're looking to accomplish and work through. And then sometimes too, for folks who are listening, you might be looking to address one part of your treatment plan or one element of your life that then might open up doors to other things that you didn't even realize were suppressed, and that need to be acknowledged, and that needs to be addressed too. Because again, this is that self-exploration stage of life, regardless of how old you are. Where you're tapping into your childhood, where you're tapping into your adulthood, where you're tapping into what it's like to be in a partnership, what it's like to be a parent, what it's like to deal with trauma, what it's like to deal with accomplishments and stress. So again, a lot of things continue to come up. So I thank you for that. If you were to have any words, I wouldn't say final words, because I don't know if NIC has further questions for you, and I don't want to
I did there.
So I'll let NIC ask his question, and then
talking about like where Bernadine said you have basically people that have been going to therapy since they were children, and 10 years of therapy. Is that something that's healthy? Is that something that's advisable to do?
Yeah, so it really depends. There are a lot of people that I know that have been in therapy for their whole life, and therapy for them is really just a healing mechanism. They've already achieved their goals, but to sustain this level of healing and enlightenment and exploration, like Bernadine says, they really do need that guidance. And if it's in that case that you're just using the therapy as a way to continue your health, why not? Why not? I strongly suggest people, if you need it, you get it. And you don't have to give much of an explanation, because if you need it, you're obviously going to seek that for a reason. So it depends on the person, what you're going through, what your level of understanding with therapy, your relationship with therapy. I know one of my professors recently said that he had to end his therapy with someone that he was treating for about 20 years, because the person achieved all their goals, and they kept just going over, and every time they achieved their goals, they would tell my professor, hey, I have something new wrong with me. So he was kind of like gaming at some point. And in that case, you want to challenge them to break free, because if you have been able to prove for 20 years that you've reached a level of individuality in your healing, then you should be able to break free, so you don't become codependent on your therapist as that indication of healing. You want to heal on your own.
Yeah,
absolutely. Healing on your own. It's nothing but a word. It's true. It's like we all have that responsibility to get ourselves through, but with assistance, right? With support, and that looks different depending on where we are in our own experiences. But, and I see, do you have another question?
Oh yeah, my
I know
last
you
question
do.
for you,
I was just like,
Pilar.
I know he
I
does.
know. Last
Before I
question.
close that out.
Right now, we're all going through quarantine. We've been inside for 2 months. So, what do you say to the people that are facing this quarantine and not taking it well? How should they go about, whether it's seeing a therapist or fixing themselves and helping themselves out mentally?
Yeah, that's a good question. I get asked that a lot. And for me, it's really just know that you're not alone, because we're all in this global crisis and we are all isolated right now. And I think that the thing about isolation is that you really have to sit with yourself, and you have to sit with your thoughts, and you have to sit with your traumas, and you have to sit with your depression. And it's very uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable for me. It's uncomfortable for other, people who are already practitioners in the field. It's uncomfortable for everyone when you have to do that level of self-reflection. But I think with growth comes growing pains, and self-reflection is a great, part of growing. So just allow it to happen and take its course, but know when if it's becoming too much, get help. And if you're saying, oh, I'm not ready for a therapist, again, go back to your trusted individuals. Who can you talk to about this that may give you sound advice? Because sometimes you talk to people and they're not giving you proper advice because they're your friend, they're your homie, they're someone who just wants to just be on your side for things. Talk to somebody who can give you that real advice, concrete tools. And if that doesn't work, seek help. You have to seek help. Agency in your local area. There's a mental health crises line. There are tons of therapeutic revenues and access to therapy directories online now. There's so many resources that we could really tune into at all different levels. So you just have to seek them and really acknowledge that you're ready to do so.
Gotcha.
I appreciate that. I think that was like great insight that I would imagine could apply with COVID and without COVID, right? As far as like really tapping into your community, your support system and resources to really be able to get yourself the support that you need. My last question was actually going to be, what are your last words for folks who are dealing with mental health? But I think that you summed that up greatly. So I want to actually bring it back to you as the clinician. For those of us who are listening, who have explored maybe the profession of clinical work or are currently in the process, what does self-care look like for the clinician in this work? Like, how do you, Pilar, take care of yourself, knowing that your responsibility is taking care of other people as they navigate through hardships in their own lifetime?
Yes. So for me, I put myself first. There's no way that I can go out and be an effective clinician, an effective leader, if I'm not able to implement those same tools with me first. So a lot of my self-care toolbox looks like prayer and meditation, journaling, working out. I strongly advise people to try to do a holistic approach of self-care, and that's something that I've been developing, because if you're able to take care of all life domains, whether it's your finances, whether it's your mental stimulation or your exercise or the foods that you eat, when we're able to treat all areas well, then we can show up for the world in our best self. So that's something that I definitely do now, but I haven't always done.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And now, do clinicians, I think is a question that I've gotten or I've asked people too. How often do clinicians go to their own therapy sessions, right, to navigate life? And is it an expectation that you also go to therapy, or is it like a faux pas? Like if you go, you don't want to acknowledge that you go, because it's like, is there like a stigma or a challenge associated with therapy amongst therapists?
I would hope it would be like a requirement for you guys.
I mean, who knows, right? Like everyone needs to go to someone, but then where does the pull end, I guess, right? Who's at the top of it? Who's like, I go to no one. I am the one.
So for me, when I first got in this field, my supervisors always said, every therapist needs a therapist. And at the time I was like, oh my gosh, I should get a therapist. And then, it really depends. If you need a therapist, no matter if you're a therapist or not, you need to get a therapist. I personally don't have a therapist right now, but I know that if I needed one, I definitely would seek one. I seek a lot of mentorship from, psychologists that are my mentors.
Mhm.
So if that's like, a cheat way of therapy, then we can call it that. But I get a lot of support from them. And then also, like, my support system is pretty strong at this point in my life. So I haven't needed therapy. However, I do think if a therapist, psychologist, social worker is in need, then the best way to approach that is to get help. Because if you don't get help, then you're not going to be able to be the clinician that you have worked to be and that you are called to be.
Mm.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for that.
Real
And I
quick,
would say
last
my
question.
last.
Sorry, B.
Wait, I want my last question.
Last one.
I want my last question.
Real quick. This is real quick.
Okay,
Do you see a lot of therapists? Do they self-diagnose themselves more, or is it something that doesn't happen at all?
No, it definitely happens. It happens. I know. I'll say, oh, I have ADHD and anxiety, and I do. I didn't get a formal diagnosis because I know what the diagnostic criteria is. And I'm able to say, hey, unfortunately, because I know it, I'm just a little more aware of when it's happening and when it's manifesting in my body or my mind. So we do it. We do it. If anyone says they don't, I don't know about that.
They're lying. Right. So do you walk around here diagnosing all your friends? Like,
I know that's
you got this, you got this, you got that. Right. I'm like, what's Bernadine's diagnosis, P? It's
Excellent.
cool. I could take it.
Hyper excellent.
I could take
She gonna go that far.
Hyper excellent.
She's saving herself. It's cool, Pilar. I appreciate you, boo. I appreciate you. Yes, I will take the side of crazy. Make it extra. No, but I was gonna close out with any last words you have for I love you. So, and I appreciate you and all of the work that you do in our community, because I think it's really, really important. Again, like, representation is key. You go through, you've gone through your own challenges, ups and downs, being the only or the first in many ways within your program, within life. But it's important that we have these conversations. So is there any are there any words, final words that you have for anyone? I would say, two tiers. Clinician, anyone who's looking to be a clinician or who is already a clinician, right? Any final words you have for them for persistence and self-care and just navigation? And then any last words you have for people who, I want to focus specifically on those who are a little hesitant to really go into the world of like assessing their mental health and navigating through that reality, maybe out of fear of judgment by others or fear of acceptance for themselves. Because I also think the other part of this is once you're diagnosed, right, that is a part of you. And I think that some people are nervous to even have that label and that title for that level of treatment too. So for those folks, what are some words you have?
Yes. So for the people who are struggling to identify whether or not to
any final words for them?
Yes, I have some final words for them. Is just be mindful. Be mindful of how you're feeling and know that the stigma and the shame that is associated with the illness can't ever overpower the greatness and the that's associated with the healing. I think that once you're able to break the silence, we're able to break the stigma, and then we're able to raise the awareness collectively, and understand it in a way that we're not only, thinking about it for self, but we're thinking about it for our communities. We're thinking about it for those that we love. So if we get into a position of we can talk about this openly and educate ourselves, then we're then in a position to empower and elevate us as a collective.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And I see, closing out, we always like to learn about where people can follow.
Pilar, let the collective know where they can follow you, social media, personal pages, or anything like that, websites.
Yes. So you can follow me at my personal page is at Dr. Tucker. And then my business page is at Empower Our Crown. And you'll find the website at our Instagram platform as well, is www.empowerourcrown.org.
All right.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Pilar, for joining us tonight in our conversation and closing out Mental Health Awareness Month with the Urban Collective show. So again, for those of you who don't know, and we didn't start out sharing this, that May is Mental Health Awareness Month. And as such, we felt it would only be right to talk about amazing folks who are doing great work in the field of mental health awareness and sustainability. Pilar not only focuses on mental health with regards to who we are as individuals, but also how that taps into our leadership capabilities, and not just on domestic front, but on a global front. So thank you so much, Pilar, for all of your work, for your time, and for your efforts, really unpacking and breaking down these walls and these barriers as a clinician of color, setting the tone for what we can do and what we are in fact doing out in the world. So thank you again for your time. And thank you again for creating Empower Our Crown.
Yes, thank you both so much. I appreciate y'all.
Oh, you're very welcome.
Absolutely. Okay. All right. Talk to you soon.
Bye.
Bye. All right. So, ladies and gentlemen, there you have it. Again, our interview with soon to be Dr. Pilar Tucker, an amazing person in the greater Boston community who, again, is in the field of mental health. She's in the doctoral program right now, looking to support folks, particularly those part of the historically marginalized community, focusing on men and women and girls, to really, again, support them in navigating life through the mental health lens, but also prioritizing self-care. Again, not just domestically, but globally. This path is not one that is easy to take, but is one that is necessary to take. So we talked about unpacking the stigmas with regards to mental health awareness, understanding what it's like academically, also understanding what it's like personally, and really, again, what to look for when you're in a position where you're looking for a therapist, and supporting therapists who are doing this work too, and how you can continue to be culturally competent in the work that you do. And as Pilar said, I believe it was culturally humbled, right? And to be able to understand that, even I would say, as a Black person, one Black person doesn't automatically understand the experiences of another Black person. It's important to ask questions as we do our work and our due diligence and diagnosis. So thank you again, Pilar, who's also the founder of Empower Our Crown, which is a nonprofit that focuses on empowering women and girls to wear the crowns that are bestowed upon them, to really continue to walk in excellence. So, Pilar, thank you.
Yes, y'all. And as always, we want to tell you where you can follow us. The Urban Collective Show can be found on Instagram at the Urban Collective Show. You can also find us on Instagram. I said Instagram. On Facebook at the Urban Collective Show. And also you can find us on Twitter. I forget what the Twitter page is. Is it TUC?
Listen, I love when it's not me that forgets.
TUC3, whatever it is. You can find us.
Find us.
Urban Collective Show. But thank you. Also, make sure to tell a friend, stream our show. Our podcast premieres tomorrow. This episode will be available as a podcast, so you can listen to that as a radio on your way to work, while you're working, or anything like that. Tell a friend to tell a friend. You can find it on Apple. You can find it on Spotify. You can find it on iHeartRadio, on Android, every single platform that's out there. We are on and are available for you to stream. And also make sure to follow us. Instagram is where we really interact with our guests, and we really interact with our collective, with you guys. So make sure to follow us on Instagram at the Urban Collective Show. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, NIC. And then we always love to end each segment with an inspirational quote to keep you all going, motivation for the week. And so this one is by James Baldwin, in really the spirit of addressing mental health and the importance of self-care. James Baldwin states, "Not everything that is faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced." So for any of you who are out there challenged or addressing mental health, again, understand that it's important that you acknowledge it, that you address it, that you deal with it head on, face on, because if you continue to ignore it, if you continue to avoid it, then change won't come. So thank you all so much. It's your First Lady, Bernadine Truth, checking out.
She man, and I
alongside
Deuces.
All right, we'll catch y'all next week.
Bye.
Bye.